They didn't just ask for belief, they demanded complete possession. From high society millionaires orchestrating execution circles in the Swiss Alps, to cartel-backed warlords boiling human remains in dark occult rituals, and a self-proclaimed divine surgeon inflicting psychological terror deep in the wilderness, these are the world's most extreme anomalies. 5 distinct groups and 5 horrific endings. But underneath the chaos, they all use the exact same psychological blueprint. And it all started right here. In the late 1980s, Japan was experiencing an unprecedented tech boom, and in the shadows of that high-tech society, a blind yoga teacher named Shoko Asahara was building a multi-million-dollar empire. His cult was called Aum Shinrikyo. Unlike traditional sects that targeted the uneducated, Asahara specifically recruited the nation's elite. He targeted brilliant young physicists, computer programmers, genetic engineers, and medical doctors from Japan's top universities. He convinced them that a nuclear World War III was imminent, and that only their superior intellect could build a society capable of surviving the apocalypse. To the public, they were a quirky religious group selling health foods and anime cartoons. But behind closed doors, Asahara's elite scientists were transforming the cult into a literal, weaponized militia. Deep in the isolated mountains of Kamikushiki, the cult constructed massive hidden laboratories. They weren't printing pamphlets. They were manufacturing death. Under Asahara's orders, the cult's medical and chemistry graduates successfully manufactured thousands of automatic assault rifles. They attempted to culture biological weapons like Ebola and anthrax. But their most terrifying achievement was the synthesis of Sarin, a military-grade, highly lethal nerve agent that suffocates its victims by paralyzing their respiratory system. By 1995, Asahara's paranoia peaked. He realized that the Japanese police were preparing to raid his facilities. To distract the authorities and trigger the chaos he had been predicting for a decade, he ordered a preemptive, coordinated strike on the heart of Tokyo. Monday morning, rush hour. 5 cult members boarded separate trains on the Tokyo subway system, carrying liquid sarin concealed in ordinary plastic bags wrapped in newspapers. At a designated moment, they dropped the packages onto the floor and used the sharpened tips of their umbrellas to pierce the plastic. As the lethal, odorless gas evaporated into the crowded, sealed train cars, a silent wave of terror rippled through the underground. People began dropping to their knees, clutching their throats, blinded as their pupils constricted to pinpoints. Over 5,000 citizens were severely injured and 13 died on the spot. The immediate aftermath was pure wartime chaos. It was the first time a non-state terrorist group had successfully deployed a weapon of mass destruction in a modern metropolis. The military raided the mountain compounds, dragged Asahara out of a hidden wall space, and eventually sent him to the gallows. But it proved a terrifying reality: that the most dangerous weapon a cult can possess isn't a fanatical belief. It is a highly educated mind. In the late 1980s, along the volatile border of Matamoros, Mexico, a terrifying myth began to circulate among the highest echelons of the drug cartels. A rumor that you could become completely bulletproof, that your shipments of narcotics could become literally invisible to the police. The man selling this myth was Adolfo Constanzo. He was young, charismatic, and deeply brilliant in the worst way possible. Constanzo wasn't just a criminal mastermind. He was a high priest of the occult. He practiced a highly corrupted, dark mutation of Palo Mayombe, an Afro-Cuban religion, mixed with deliberate, raw devil worship. To the brutal cartel bosses trafficking tons of narcotics across the border, Constanzo wasn't a religious fanatic. He was a business investment. They paid him thousands of dollars for protection, but Constanzo's protection required a price that wasn't paid in money. It required blood. Constanzo convinced his followers that the power of his magic, depended entirely on the agony of the sacrifice. The more the victim suffered, the stronger the spell. This transformed a remote desert ranch called Santa Elena into a literal human slaughterhouse. When police eventually breached that property, they uncovered a scene that defied human comprehension. In the center of a filthy shack sat the Nganga, a massive iron cauldron. Inside it, submerged in a foul, rotting broth, were dead scorpions, black cats, human brains, human hearts, and severed limbs. Constanzo's followers didn't just murder. They tortured their victims for hours, decapitated them, and boiled their vital organs to create a ritual brew. A brew that the cult members literally drank, believing it granted them supernatural immunity from bullets and federal agents. At least 15 bodies were unearthed from the shallow graves surrounding the ranch. But the cult's feeling of absolute invincibility was their undoing. In March of 1989, during spring break, the cult hijacked a 21-year-old American pre-med student named Mark Kilroy. They brought him to the ranch. They subjected him to the same horrific ritual. But kidnapping an American citizen ignited an international wildfire. The U.S. government put massive pressure on Mexico. The federal police launched a relentless, scorched earth manhunt, tearing the border apart. And then, the magic failed. A cult member, believing he was truly invisible to the law, drove straight through a police checkpoint. The police followed him directly to the ranch. The horror was finally exposed. But Constanzo had already fled to a safe house apartment in Mexico City. On May 6th, police spotted the apartment. Constanzo realized the walls were closing in. He opened the window and began firing wildly into the street with an assault rifle. When he ran out of ammunition and heard the police breaching the front door, Constanzo refused to be taken alive. He turned to one of his most loyal henchmen and ordered him to pull the trigger. When the smoke cleared, police found the high priest slumped in a closet, dead, shot by his own follower. Most cults prey on the desperate, the broke, and the vulnerable. But in the mid-1980s, across Switzerland, France, and Canada, a secret society began recruiting the exact opposite. They targeted millionaires, high-ranking government officials, prominent doctors, and wealthy entrepreneurs. The group was called the Order of the Solar Temple. Led by a charismatic public speaker named Luc Jouret and a cold, calculating financial mastermind named Joseph DiMambro, this wasn't a gritty street sect. This was an elite club. They blended the ancient mystery of the Knights Templar with modern New Age spirituality and a terrifying warning that the world was facing an unavoidable ecological apocalypse. To survive, the leaders told their wealthy followers that they didn't need to hide in the woods. They needed to prepare for a transit, a cosmic journey to the star Sirius, where they would achieve spiritual immortality. For years, the millionaires willingly handed over their fortunes, funding luxury chalets and secret chapels across the globe. DiMambro's paranoia escalated into absolute madness. The horror began in a quiet suburb of Montreal, Canada. DiMambro ordered the execution of a young family's infant child because he believed the baby boy was the literal Antichrist sent to destroy his order. The infant was stabbed to death with a wooden stake. Days later, in the quiet mountains of Switzerland, the ultimate transit was triggered. This wasn't a mass suicide born out of panic. It was a cold, calculated, industrial-scale execution. On October 5th, emergency crews rushed to a blazing chalet in Cheery, Switzerland. When firefighters finally breached the flames and entered a hidden, mirror-lined underground chapel, the scene froze them in place. Dozens of wealthy cult members lay dead, arranged in a perfect geometric circle radiating outward from an altar. They were dressed in their fine ceremonial capes. But this wasn't a peaceful departure. Forensic teams quickly discovered that plastic bags had been tied over their heads. Most had been drugged and then shot directly in the skull. The leaders had designed a complex electronic ignition system using telephone wires and timers to burn the evidence and the bodies simultaneously. Over 50 members perished in that single week across Canada and Switzerland. They spent their lives buying their way into an elite cosmic future, only to end up as ashes in the ruins of a burning chalet. In the late 1990s, in a remote, rolling valley of southwestern Uganda, a former bar owner named Credonia Mwerinda claimed she was receiving direct visions from the Virgin Mary. She teamed up with a wealthy, charismatic politician named Joseph Kibwetir to form a highly restrictive religious movement. Their objective seemed righteous: a total, uncompromising adherence to the Ten Commandments to survive a looming apocalypse, which they claimed would destroy the earth on midnight of December 31st, 1999. To ensure no one sinned, Mwerinda instituted a terrifying rule. To prevent anyone from breaking the commandment against lying, she banned all verbal speech. For years, hundreds of followers lived in total, absolute silence. To prepare for the fast approaching end of the world, the leaders gave a final command: sell everything you own. Families sold their land, their cattle, and their clothing, handing every single cent over to Mwerinda and Kibwetir. But then, the midnight came. January 1st, the year 2000, the sun rose. The world did not end. Suddenly, the spell began to crack. The silent followers began breaking their vows, demanding their money back, and threatening to report the leaders to the local police. Mwerinda realized that her multi-million-dollar financial scam was about to explode, so she adapted. She claimed her calculations were slightly off, and that the Virgin Mary had revealed the true date of the apocalypse, March 17th, year 2000. On the morning of March 17th, over 500 followers entered the cult's primary church for a massive celebratory feast. They sang and they prayed. But as the doors closed, men on the outside began working in the shadows. They used heavy hammers to drive massive iron nails through the wooden doors and boarded up every single window from the outside. Minutes later, a massive, thunderous explosion ripped through the building. A raging industrial inferno consumed the structure within minutes, burning everyone alive inside. When international news crews and forensic teams arrived days later, they realized the horror went infinitely deeper than the church fire. As police began excavating the surrounding properties and the gardens underneath the leaders' private villas, they uncovered mass graves. Hundreds of additional bodies, victims of poisoning and strangulation, were buried weeks before the fire. The cult hadn't committed mass suicide. The leaders had systematically executed their entire congregation to silence the witnesses of a financial fraud. Mwerinda and Kibwetir vanished into thin air, taking the stolen fortunes with them and leaving behind only the ash-filled graves of rural Uganda. Deep in the bleak, isolated wilderness of Quebec, Canada, a different kind of monster was building a kingdom. His name was Roch Thériault. To the outside world in the late 1970s, he was a charismatic, highly devout Seventh-day Adventist. He convinced a small group of followers, mostly vulnerable women, to abandon modern civilization, move into the woods and form a strict commune to prepare for the literal end of the world. They called themselves the Ant Hill Kids. Why? Because Thériault told them that, like ants, they had to work, blindly, tirelessly, and in absolute obedience to their ruler. But once society's safety net was left behind, the holy man unmasked himself. The commune became a concentrated laboratory of pure psychological terror. Thériault broke his followers completely by destroying their connection to reality. He declared that he was the literal voice of God. To prove his divinity, he banned all modern medicine. He declared that he alone possessed the power to heal. What followed is one of the most chilling chapters in criminal history. Thériault began performing horrific, unanesthetized surgical procedures on his followers, on a filthy kitchen table. Using meat cleavers, sewing needles, and household drills, he would cut into his victims' flesh to extract their sins. If a follower complained, the punishment was worse than the surgery. He forced his wives to endure unspeakable physical torture, like breaking their bones and then resetting them poorly. On purpose. When a 2-year-old child in the commune fell ill, Thériault performed a mock ritual to save him. The ritual ended the boy's life, but the psychological control was so absolute, so suffocating, that the grieving mother was forced to thank Thériault for taking her child to heaven. The human mind can endure a terrifying amount of darkness before it finally snaps. For a follower named Gabrielle Lavallee, that breaking point came when Thériault, in a fit of rage, used a kitchen knife to amputate her right hand. Somehow, bleeding, mutilated, and freezing, Gabrielle found the residual strength to crawl out of the cabin. She ran into the bitter Canadian winter, navigating miles of dense, trackless wilderness, until she reached a highway. Her escape shattered the illusion. When she collapsed into the arms of the authorities, her physical injuries told a story that text could never convey. The police raided the compound, and the prophet was stripped of his divine title, chained, and dragged into a courtroom. Roch Thériault was sentenced to life in prison, where, years later, a fellow inmate ended his life in the prison yard. But the scars left in that Canadian forest never truly healed. That was all for today, guys. It takes a lot of effort and time to make videos like this, and it would mean the world to me if you would press the subscribe button. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.